Imagine yourself suddenly being plucked out of your job and plopped into Washington to serve your congressional district. What is it like? What are the people like? What's going on? We're going to have an insider's view of that and state and federal elections on this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which as always is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Men in Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hi there, and welcome everyone to this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm really happy to see you all here, and we've got a very great guest this week. It's Congressman Joe Sempolinski. He has been serving for 2 months now, 3 months. I can't.
Yeah.
We've interviewed Joe before, and in fact, if you're watching this on replay, I will link that earlier interview to the text underneath this. But Joe, let's start off. We were talking about in the green room about how Congress is like high school. What's it feel like to be there, to represent your constituents? How is it different from home?
Yeah, I mean, I refer to it as a little bit like a high school because of the social setting. You have 435 people who are all very different from all over the country, and you end up gravitating to people where there's some similarity, right? Maybe they serve on the same committee you do, or maybe they're from the same state as you, or maybe they came into Congress the same time as you. In my case, other special election winners, or remember, I'm leaving. So there's also the folks that aren't coming back next time that are retiring. So you end up in this interesting dynamic when you're voting on the floor, because in session days, usually there's a chunk of the afternoon where we're voting and they push all the votes together, and you end up on the floor of the House for maybe 20 minutes, maybe it's a couple hours, and it's almost only members of Congress. And so you end up, as you would with any group of people, talking about life, talking about the sports game that happened the night before, talking about your kids, talking about certainly talking about legislation, talking about politics, and you get to know each other. So it's actually a quite interesting environment. I get to meet a lot of very interesting people. But I would say this: I'm coming to you from Corning, my office in Corning, in Steuben County. I have more fun when I'm home with my family, with my constituents, with the people back home. But so far, we've been very productive, and it's been a really just a fascinating experience and the honor of a lifetime.
So you were telling me before about some of the things that you do when you do come home, and one of those things is you go talk to schools, some classes. What are the sort of things that the kids typically ask when you go in and see them?
Yeah, so I serve on the Education and Labor Committee, so anything that covers education. And on the subcommittee that I serve on, that is early childhood, primary, and secondary education. So specifically, that's where I have a little bit more jurisdiction. And frankly, it's the most important subcommittee you could be serving on right now, given all of the things that have happened with kids coming out of COVID, and certainly all the concerns parents have about the curriculums being presented to students. But what's fun about talking to school groups, I'm going to talk to another one this afternoon. I've talked to folks all throughout the districts, high school, collegiate, graduate students, is students, especially the younger the student is, the more blunt they are. If they have a question, they just ask it. They don't dance around it. They don't say it in a nice way. They just sort of ask the question, which is actually, frankly, very refreshing, because we don't have enough sort of frankness and bluntness, I think, sometimes in politics. And they want clear answers to clear questions. And I think we could learn a lot in that way from some of our younger citizens.
What was the strangest question that you ever got asked, or like the most surprising? That sounded
Yeah,
way smarter than.
kids ask interesting things. Some of them that are more politically astute will ask about like policy questions, those sort of things. A lot of times they're curious about sort of day-to-day life. One kid asked if I get paid, which I said, yeah, I do. And then he wanted to know how that worked. But a lot of times it's, have you met the president or those sort of things. So kids are interested because it's they're kids. So it's new to them. They want to know sort of how it works, but also, especially if you're maybe like a senior in high school, you're also looking now, all right, I'm going to go into the real world. Now I'm a little more concerned about the policies that are being generated. I'm a little more concerned, but I've still got that youthful frankness. And they sort of will ask you, well, where do you stand on X issue? Where do you stand on Y issue? And they want a clear answer. They don't want you playing political games, dancing around. They want to know where you're at, and they deserve that answer. And so do every other member of my constituency. I've done town hall meetings. I've done a town hall meeting in every county in the district since I've been home for the October and November recess. And even if you're not a kid anymore, you deserve those type of answers. And I was more than happy to travel to every corner of the district to provide them to anybody who asked.
So you're in a very unique position. You're filling out a term. You did not run for office to be reelected. You left that for somebody else. You're kind of like a classic Mr. Smith goes to Washington kind of situation. How has Washington reacted to that sort of thing? I mean, certainly they know about this. Do they treat you any differently as a result?
It's been interesting. The media has been a little different because I'm sort of viewed as this is for an odd, unique story. So there's been a lot of articles about, oh, this is this really short time, and wanting to know about my background or what have you. So there's been friendly, but sort of viewed with curiosity from the media. It is a good diagnostic on people's interest and personality and priorities among people in DC, whether that's elected officials or staff or lobbyists. Some people are just nice people, right? And they want to be friendly no matter who you are and want to be helpful no matter what your situation is. But then occasionally there are people that realize, oh, you're not going to be here in January. So, all right, I don't have to, that's somebody I don't have to talk to anymore because they're not going to be there to help with whatever that person's agenda is in January. So it is a sort of protection against some of the things that inflate members of Congress's heads, where everybody says, oh, how nice you are, how smart you are, and all these sort of things. I don't get as much of that being a lame duck from minute one.
So let's talk about a little bit about maybe what you may have found out as a lame duck congressman. What was the attitude among, say, the Republicans going into the midterm election? What was the source of their excitement, and did they even involve you because you weren't running again?
Yeah, it certainly involved me. I was involved in the conference meetings we had leading up to when everybody went home to campaign. We were in session for most of September and then came home for October, and I'll go back into session on Monday. And we were focused on what we were going to present to the American people as our platform, our agenda. That was the commitment to America, was the document that we put together. And so there was a lot of excitement around that because it was a very unifying document. And it was something we thought could appeal to conservatives and independents and Democrats. And certainly it seems like it did in certain parts of the country. We are in a position where the Republicans, it looks like, are going to take control of the House. There's still a chance we may take the Senate. And so it was a win, but I think maybe we were hoping for a little bit bigger win, but a win nevertheless. Anytime you take control of the House of Representatives and you take the gavel out of Nancy Pelosi's hands, that is a win.
So before we start talking about the win aspect, let's talk a little bit about perhaps the not meeting expectations aspect of things. Has there been any sort of discussion or talk about maybe what happened? Where are we at the point now where redistricting is so strong that it's almost impossible to shift seats?
Well, I think one of the things we learned on Tuesday is campaigns do matter. Candidate quality matters. And you have dynamics, especially at the federal level, where people will vote Republican if they're a Republican for even sometimes a weak candidate, or they'll vote Democrat if they're a Democrat, sometimes for a weak candidate. But nevertheless, there is still, to some degree, you need to have somebody that really does know what they're doing, and have somebody that is going to execute a good campaign. That does matter. That's one lesson I think everybody took from Tuesday. It'll be interesting next week, because next week we're going to have a lot of conference meetings, because we have to prepare for the next session. Now that we know who the new members are, they're going to be down for new member orientation. They'll be participating in voting for who our candidate for speaker is, who our majority leader is, who our whip is. And so we're going to have people that just came off the campaign trail. We'll have sitting members all together for good chunks of that week. And I think one of the major topics of discussion is, hey, what went right? What went wrong? What can we do better in 24? Just like any organization would do an after action type of meeting after a major event.
One of the things that I saw in the reports was there's a difference between getting out the vote and getting out the ballot. And it seems as though the Democrats may have out-hustled the Republicans on procuring the ballot, rather than, in some cases, I know in, for example, Arizona, Kerry Lake said, don't do the pre-vote, don't do the early vote, vote on election day. And it seems like it might be that this ballot harvesting, which is legal in most places, is something that could be responsible for making it more difficult to flip these seats. So have you talked anything about that with some of the people down in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, that has come up in discussions that I've had over the course of the last couple of days. And my take on it is, when we win elections, we can set the rules for what they want to be. Obviously, I know there's a lot of conservatives that are concerned about votes that don't take place on election day, especially mail-in or absentee votes, more maybe than early votes, because early votes still take place in person. But if the rules are what the rules are, and until you win elections, you can't change the rules, you have to play aggressively within those rules. And this is not a sporting event. You know, we talk about it sort of like it's a sporting event, but this is extremely serious. This is life or death type of decision making that happens. This is not a game. So if we really are concerned about the direction of the country, and we really do believe that our party is going to lead the country in a better direction, then we do need to not concede any area to the other side.
Well, when you say leading the country in a better direction, this is what a lot of pundits are now questioning. How could the polls, and let's not get into whether or not the polls are accurate. Let's assume that they are. That there's a large number of people, a majority, a significant majority of people who have concerns about policies, the direction the country is going in, and yet the results are, for the most part, status quo. I know the Republicans might take over the Senate and even the House, but it's going to be again by the slimmest of margins. So it's 50 plus or minus. So that's why I say status quo. How do you reconcile the fact that people are upset and they maybe want change, and yet they don't vote for change?
Yeah, I think you saw different answers to that question in different portions of the country. In Florida, the Republicans won everything, and they won it by margins that haven't happened ever in the history of Florida. In New York, I wish Mr. Zeldin had been elected governor, but he got within 5 points, which is dramatically closer than any previous recent Republican gubernatorial candidate. We are looking to probably have 11 House members from New York, which is huge. 7 of them freshmen, 4 incumbents running for re-election, 1, but 7 new members from New York on the Republican side. So in certain areas of the state, we did see some evidence of this sort of wave, but in other areas of the country, we did, and it's I think different areas of the country have different concerns. Different areas of the country see things a little differently, and different people from different points of view may want change, but just because you maybe agree that something's gone wrong with the country, that doesn't mean you agree on the direction you go to fix it. Somebody that maybe in 2016 voted for Donald Trump, or somebody that voted in 2016 for Bernie Sanders, probably agreed there's corruption in the government. They probably agreed that there's too many sort of insiders that control things, but they had very different answers to that question. So you do see that.
Well, we'll talk more about the state, what happened in New York State after the break. If you have a question, by the way, feel free to go to the chat and I will relay the question to the congressman. But first, let's take a look at this message.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Welcome back. You're watching the State of Greater Western New York report, and with us today is Congressman Joe Sempolinski. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I told you, it's...
I've heard it every which way with that name.
Yeah, believe me, Carosa's pronounced all different ways too. So I want to get back to New York State and the Congress situation, particularly in Long Island, how there was a flip. Can you explain to our viewers what happened in Long Island and why it was significant?
Yeah, so in Long Island, it looks like we're going to have 4 seats on Long Island. Going into the election, we held 2. And one of those was being vacated by Mr. Zeldin. So the only incumbent running was Mr. Garbarino in the 2nd district. So we held the Zeldin seat, which we sort of expected to. That was a pretty Republican seat. I would have been very surprised if that wasn't held. But there was, in the 3rd and 4th district, these were Democrat-held seats. In both cases, the incumbent Democrat left. Congressman Suozzi ran unsuccessfully in the gubernatorial primary. He ran against Hochul in the Democratic governor primary, lost to her, but thereby vacated his seat. And in the 4th district, Congresswoman Rice just decided to retire. She decided to, go do something else, I guess. And so she didn't run for re-election. So you had these opportunities with 2 open Democratic seats, but these are seats that have been held by Democrats for quite some time. And the farther east you go on Long Island, the more conservative it gets. The farther west you go, the closer you get to the city, the more liberal it gets. And this is the western part of Nassau County, these 2 seats, and we won both of them. And it was a little bit unexpected. Especially the 4th district wasn't necessarily as much on people's radar. And then you throw into that, we won in the 17th district against the sitting DCCC chairman, the campaign chief for the House Democrats. He lost his seat. And then picking up the 19th district as well, we had 4 seats that had been held by Democrats going into the election that we won. So Long Island, I think the effect is especially a Zeldin coattails effect. He's a Long Island guy. His base was Long Island. He was running up the score on Long Island. And though it didn't make him governor, it provided us with 2 additional members of the House just on Long Island and 2 more in the Hudson Valley. So it was a big night on Long Island. And Long Island is an enormous chunk of the population of New York. Is a very heavily populated area. And if Republicans are ever going to really win statewide, you need to do well in Nassau and Suffolk County. Lee wrote the map on how to do that on Tuesday.
Well, it's sort of interesting because, like you say, Lee Zeldin is from Long Island. His coattails were were very prominent there. He was able to flip a couple of seats. I'm wondering, is this perhaps a type of strategy that the Republican Party in New York State may look to in the future? I mean, you might not be able to win at the statewide level for governor, but if you have a strong candidate like Zeldin, you may use that enthusiasm in very specific areas to start flipping congressional seats. Do you think people might be considering that?
Well, I think the lesson to take away is, and Lee has talked about this since the election, politics is a team sport. Certainly, you need to have a strong individual campaign. You need to have a strong candidate. They need to know what they're doing. But if one member of the team is strong, it's going to make the other candidates stronger. And the reverse. If one candidate is weaker, it's going to make the other campaigns on the same party line weaker. So you need to build a strong team of candidates that can work together, that can complement each other, that will coordinate as best they can, given the different offices that they're running for. So Lee was very good at that. Lee, while he was running around, was also building the team. He was continually supporting other candidates. He was very supportive of me in my special election in August. He was great to work with. And sometimes you have people that don't think of that way. They're up the top of the ticket, they're doing their thing, and they don't really care what happens to Congress or the state legislature. It looks like they did really well, especially in the state Senate on Long Island. So Lee was a team leader. He was the captain of our team, not just our gubernatorial candidate. And you saw the results of that throughout the state of New York. So he handled it the right way. And I would ask any future statewide candidates, especially future gubernatorial candidates, to emulate what Lee did in that way. Be the captain of the team, be a team leader.
I'm thinking now, you mentioned the statewide seats. What were there any flips in either the Assembly or the Senate that might have been significant? I'm not aware of any.
Yeah, it looks like, especially downstate, we're going to pick up some seats in the state legislature. There was some, I think there was a couple of unexpected flips even in the city. I think there was an assembly seat on Staten Island that flipped, and I think there's a very close Senate seat in Brooklyn where we don't know which way it's going to go. So the Democrats will still control the state Senate. The Democrats will still control the state Assembly, but their majorities will be smaller than they were going into the election because of the strength at the top of the ticket.
Are you aware of any sort of changes in the Western New York region in terms of flipping? Or is that pretty much status
No,
quo?
as far as like unexpected flips, no, not in our neck of the woods. The Republicans went after a couple of state Senate seats in Monroe County pretty aggressively. That had in the past been Republicans, but we didn't win those two. So it was sort of status quo in this part of the state. Most of the changes were happening in other areas.
Is that because the top of the ticket really was, downstate oriented on the Republican side? I'm talking about, and maybe is it because the top of the ticket on the Democrat side included a candidate from Western New York?
Hochul didn't campaign much in Western New York. She spent most of her time campaigning in New York City, and that's how she won, frankly. Lee didn't get to the number he needed in New York City, so there was just too much of a lead coming out of the city before the other votes came in from the rest of the state. So if Lee needed another 5% or so in the city, so she was campaigning in Brooklyn and the Bronx and those type of places. I think the reason you're seeing changes in other parts of the state compared to here is here the Republican districts are pretty Republican and the Democrat districts are pretty Democrat. There's not a lot of swing districts. Whereas when you get to the Hudson Valley, you get to portions of Long Island, you get to certain pockets in New York City, there is more of a swing nature to the districts. And some of the surprises in the city is Lee, remember, was running better than previous Republican candidates. So suddenly areas that weren't traditionally competitive down there suddenly became competitive. So I think more of Lee was a good candidate from downstate, and that's where the swing districts were, as opposed to Hochul was not a particularly strong candidate, period. And she certainly wasn't running around Western New York drumming up votes.
I was wondering if you had a chance to look at any of the internal numbers, independents, blanks. Was there any indication of how they may have gone? Are they still a significant constituency? and how are they being targeted by both parties?
They're a very significant constituency. They're a very growing constituency, unaffiliated voters. So yeah, both candidates, we're certainly going after them. I think a little bit more the Republican, because just the math. If you're a Republican that wants to win, you have to have a big chunk of independents vote for you. So going after them is very important if you're running statewide as a Republican candidate. But that over time, that number has increased. More and more people are unaffiliated with a party in New York State.
We had another question from the audience. That was the first one. The second one was if you can comment on the turnout, both statewide and in New York City. Were there any differences?
Yeah, I mean, turnout seemed to be sort of up, but not like dramatically up. I was mostly looking very closely at the Southern Tier in my neck of the woods, and I'm the Steuben County Republican chairman, so I was watching closely what happened in Steuben County, and turnout was in some of these rural areas was up. So early in the day, I was feeling very confident because Lee was hitting numbers that were better than I had hit in the special election, and I'm from Steuben County. He's from Long Island, and he was sort of overperforming in Republican areas. But obviously, you would want it to be even maybe a little higher than it was. Although, again, in the Republican heartland areas, turnout was up, and he was doing very well. What he needed was to get a little bit higher percentage in some of the urban areas.
Well, let's end it on this. What did we learn from this? Has anybody learned anything, either the state level or the federal level, or do both sides say, hey, we did good enough, we can go forward with what we've been doing? What sort of changes might we expect?
Well, I hope that the Democrats say, hey, all right, we dodged a bullet here. We need to change our ways a little bit. My fear is the reaction from the governor is going to be, oh, I'm unbeatable. Everything went wrong. She ran a bad campaign. It was a bad year as far as crime, and as far as the president wasn't giving her any sort of help with all of his sort of incompetence. So her reaction, I hope, is I need to moderate, but I worry her reaction is going to be, I can't lose a general election, because if I was going to lose, it was going to be this time. And then she becomes more concerned about the primary and pivots far to the left. So it'll be interesting to see how Hochul reacts. So far, Biden is saying full steam ahead. I don't think that's good for the country, and it's very important that the Republicans win the presidency. Now we can stop the bleeding by having the House and potentially the Senate. We can put a check on what the Biden agenda is, but the real answer is making sure a Republican is elected president in 2024.
Interesting. What I'm wondering is, within New York State now, just staying within New York State, and I realize this isn't your party, but I have interviewed other people within New York State who tell me that there's a bit of a competition between so-called moderate Democrats and progressive Democrats. If you look at the results with this election, if you look at the results for this election, in the midterm election, just within New York State, who won? The moderate Democrats or the progressive Democrats?
I think in the long term, it remains to be seen, because that'll be determined by how they react to it and which direction do they go. In this case, I think you had a governor who was a little bit of a chameleon. She had spent a lot of her career in Western New York as a moderate. She was county clerk and was a moderate county clerk, and then she was briefly in Congress. She served for less than one term in Congress, and she was sort of a moderate there. And then all of a sudden she's governor, and she's running around New York City trying to do very liberal things to stave off a primary challenge. And so you have a governor that's been in both camps. She's been a moderate when it was suited her to be a moderate. She's been a progressive when it suited her to be a progressive. And so because of that, and now she's going to be governor for 4 years, which is an eternity in politics, which direction she goes is, I think, going to determine which branch of the Democratic Party is ascendant.
Well, that'll be interesting to see as we move forward. Well, Joe, thank you very much for being with us on today's show. Thank you all there out listeners. Thank you for your questions. If you want to be a member of the live audience, you can. It's very simple. all you need to do is go to this website, stateof.greaterwesternewyork.com, complete the form there, the registration. It's free, and every Thursday morning, you'll receive the invitation to participate in the shows as a member of the live audience. That's the only way you'll be able to ask the questions. If you can't make it, I realize it's during work at noon, then you can watch it on Facebook, our Facebook page. If you like that, you'll be notified when the program is rebroadcast at 1:30 on Sundays. If you prefer YouTube, just subscribe to our channel there. Same thing, you'll be notified when it's rebroadcast on 1:30 on Sundays. Otherwise, you can always go to stateof.greaterwesternewyork.com and watch the archive of it. That's all we have for this week. Joe, thank you again. We'll see you later, everyone.